Good morning, everybody. So, gonna do something again a little bit different today, and what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna be refreshing my batch of raw kombucha. So kombucha is something that's been around for a very long time. It's essentially a fermented drink. I'll try to get a clear shot of that. Looks absolutely disgusting. Smells absolutely disgusting. I don't know why I drink this, but I do when I like it. So I'll try to get a good shot here, but this thing that's floating on top here, that looks like lard from the video, is this really kind of gelatinous thick layer that's called a SCOBY. So S-C-O-B-Y, so SCOBY. So SCOBY, cute little name. Hi, look at me, I'm a SCOBY. It is actually an acronym, so SCOBY. It stands for Symbiotic Culture of Bacteria and Yeast. And really cool because this is a naturally made drink. What you end up doing is you end up starting with putting a SCOBY. You either make it yourself or you get it from someone. You can get it off Kijiji or Craigslist or wherever, but a lot of people make them. The interesting thing, it just keeps reproducing itself. But it's made in really through the formation, the fermentation through 3 processes. So that's lactic acid bacteria, acetic acid bacteria, and yeast. You'll also see that in kimchi. It obviously doesn't form this, but you'll see it in things like beer as well, except for when you have beer and you have lactic acid bacteria and acetic acid bacteria, that gives it the sour taste, but then a lot of people will actually think that the beer is off. So, so really cool. So you can actually see that you'll hear some people refer to a baby SCOBY. So the SCOBY's fallen. There's 2 in there right now. And what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna make a new batch, separate the SCOBY off, put it in the new batch, and bottle this, which is now called raw kombucha. So this is kombucha in its raw form. So gonna put this down. Again, hopefully that makes sense of what it is, but it'll all make sense kind of when I start making it, about how it goes through. Okay, so first things first, you're gonna need to start with about 1.5 liters of water. Doesn't have to be hot or cold water. We're gonna end up boiling it anyways, so just whatever comes out of your tap. And the other thing you're gonna need is sugar. So there's really only 3 parts to making kombucha, and that is water, sugar, and your tea. You're gonna wanna use either oolong tea, black tea, or green tea. And you're gonna want it to be natural. You're not gonna want it to have a bunch of flavorings or anything like that, because it just won't work. So if you're using some kind of flavored green tea, like mint green tea or something that has oils or extracts into it, it's not going to work. So that's 1.5 liters of water. Next, I'm gonna add about 1/2 cup of sugar. So for every 1.5 liters of water, you're gonna add 1/2 cup of sugar. So if you were to convert it and you wanted to only make 1 liter, 1/2 cup is 125 mils of sugar. So I would say 80 mils to 1 liter. And all you have to do, turn that on, bring it up to a boil. And when it brings it up to a boil, we'll come back and show you the next step. Okay, so while that's boiling, I've grabbed 3 things. So I'm grabbing a strainer. This is just to make sure that you're grabbing and kind of separating the stuff that's in there. I have a second bowl. This one's really just gonna be to hold the SCOBY that I take out. And the third bowl is going to be to put the liquid in. So when you're making it, it's important to remember that if you want to continue making it, you're gonna need to reserve at least 10% of your previous batch, as well as one of the SCOBYs, preferably the new one that's been formed. They call it the baby, but an old one goes in, a new one gets formed. You kind of take it off the new one, you discard the old one, and then you reuse the new one, and then it eventually becomes the old one, a new one, old one, new one, so on, so on. So what we're gonna start by doing is just you want to wash your hand. You want to make sure that everything is nice and clean. If you have a rubber glove or something like that, that works as well. But you'll kind of see when you're taking this out that it is almost like very gelatinous, and it really, really smells like vinegar. But it comes out, it's quite thick. I'm hoping that you can see this, but there's multiple layers that have formed. They're pellicles basically, but there's multiple layers that have formed. Layer, 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 and it just kind of becomes this compressed puck. So you're gonna want to get that out. So we'll get this out. That can go into your jar. And then I'm just gonna use the other jar that I had with the water in it to kind of start straining out some of this liquid. So as it's going through, you'll kind of start seeing that it is, there's another SCOBY on the bottom that's kind of separated. But I'm sitting around that mark now where I probably want to reserve about that much. So again, I'm gonna put the rest inside this, inside my reserve bowl. And I'm going to get out the second SCOBY. Just gonna slide out. You can kind of see that this this SCOBY is totally different. This is the new one here that was kind of formed. It's not nearly as hard. It'll kind of grow off like this as it gets darker at the bottom. But it would have sat like this, and then you kind of peel this layer off. This becomes the old SCOBY, so you can throw that away. This is the new SCOBY. This is what essentially is going to start your new batch of kombucha. So I'll show you the next steps. All right, now the water's coming up to a boil, or it is at a boil now. This is at which point that you can turn it off. The sugar's in there, the water's in there, and now we want to add our tea bags. So I'm putting in 3 bags. I would recommend 2 to 3 bags per 1.5 liters. I put in 3 myself just because I like it to be a bit stronger in flavor. But you can let that steep like you normally would for 4 to 6 minutes. Then you'll remove them, and then you're gonna want this whole thing to cool. So while this is kind of just starting the steeping process, I'll kind of show what else I've done. So I cleaned the jar out because I'm gonna use the same jar. You can clean it out with soap and water, that's totally fine. Just make sure that after having the soap and water in there, you're rinsing it out very thoroughly with cold water. Any residual soap left in there is going to kill the entire batch, and you'll have to start from scratch. So I've got separated my raw kombucha, which I will use for drinking. I've got my 10%, approximately, there's more than that there, but approximately 10% of what's gonna be kind of the starter for the next batch. And then I've got the old SCOBYs. So I've got the old one, which is gonna be discarded, and I've got the baby SCOBY. So to prepare yourself for making the next batch, what I do is I just drop this SCOBY back in to the jar, and I add in the essentially the kind of the mother. And this is going to be again the 10% that you're gonna need to start the next batch. So you can see it's filled up about maybe 15% of the jar, but that also includes the size of the SCOBY. Once this is fully steeped after 6 minutes or your desired taste, you're gonna remove them. Again, you're gonna let it cool down completely because you don't wanna add hot liquid into your kombucha mixture. And then it's ready to go. So once this is cooled down, I'll kind of just show you the process of what that looks like, the color that it starts out at, and you can obviously see the color that it starts out at versus the color that it ends at. But this is basically the process. I'll come back in a few minutes and show you guys what to do next. Okay, so now that the boiling tea has now come down to room temperature, what you can actually do is so I've already removed the tea bags after the about 6 minutes, which is where I wanted to steep it. You can see the color of it's fairly dark for the amount of liquid that's in there for only having the 3 bags. But what you can do now is just transfer this. You don't have to worry about straining it. You can actually just transfer this into your something to pour it into. Again, you don't want it to be hot, you don't want it to be cold, you just want it to be room temperature. But at this point now, you're just gonna add this back in with that 10%, mother will call it, and the baby SCOBY, and fill it up to the top, or however much you made. Again, I know how much I usually like to make, and that's about 1.5 liters. But just put the rest of it in. Again, by doing it this way, by putting the 10% in first, what you're actually doing is you're just allowing it to mix without having to add any additional like spoons or whisks or anything like that. So now I know it's incorporated. You can see that the baby scoby's at the bottom, but by tomorrow it'll probably float to the top and then start forming, and you'll see that those pellicles will start forming even on top. But the difference between this and doing the bottle fermentation, which I'll show, is that you want this one to be open air, or at least be breathable, where when you're doing the second stage of fermentation, which is to build up the carbonation, you want it to be completely sealed and airtight. So all I do for this is I actually just add a cloth or a rag on top of it. I always use kind of the same one, but it looks like, just looks like this. I put it on top loosely. I just cover it with an elastic, and that way it's breathable. And now it's going to kind of go through the fermentation process. But again, if you covered this really tightly with something that's not breathable, this isn't going to work, and it's just going to die, and I'm sure you'll probably have mold forming. But check it in about 2-3 days. Have a taste. You can just take it off, put a spoon in it. Don't worry about too much. Just make sure it's a clean spoon. Have a taste. Notice the acidity level. Recover it. Come back 2 more days later, so 4 or 5 days. Have a taste. You'll start noticing that the acidity is starting to change. I really noticed that at the 1 week, 1.5 week mark, it's where I start really noticing that kind of vinegar acidic taste to it. But as you start getting to 2 weeks, that's when I find it's really pronounced. That's when I like to pull it off. I don't like mine to be too acidic and vinegary, but you can keep going and going and going. You could really leave this in the jar for months and months and months. You could probably leave it in there for a year, and you'll just know that the SCOBY just keeps getting thicker and thicker and thicker as it's absorbing the liquid until you basically have nothing, and then you'd have to discard it. But so the next step I kind of want to walk you guys through is bottle fermenting your raw kombucha. So we have our raw kombucha here. Again, that's been going for about 2 to 3 weeks. And I just have an empty, sterile, clean jar here. Again, I just reuse them, I wash them, I put them in the dishwasher, and then I just run them with water after, make sure there's nothing left in it. But at this point, for raw kombucha, you're not gonna add anything to it. You can just basically pour that into the bottle. I would just leave a little bit of space at the top. About that much. And because there's still sugar present in here, now that we're gonna close it, it's going to actually go through a second fermentation. So I'm gonna seal that really tight. You're gonna want something with an airtight seal, whether it's this or one of those pop-top jars that you can buy at IKEA. But again, there's gonna be gases that are gonna form in this. Basically, it's gonna carbonate itself very lightly because I haven't added that much sugar. If you were to add additional sugar into the bottom of this, let's say a teaspoon, it's gonna continue to eat that sugar, and then it's gonna become extremely carbonated. But raw kombucha in itself is very, very healthy for you. You shouldn't drink too much of it. I would recommend maybe maximum a cup a day. But again, when you seal it really tight, it's gonna take about 4 days for it to really start to fizz, and you'll notice at the side of the bottle that you'll start seeing fizzing come up. If you were to start adding flavoring agents to this, I'll do this at another point, but if you were to start adding flavoring agents to this, like fresh fruit or fruit syrups or anything like that, something natural though, you don't want to just add like a store-bought syrup, but you could add, like, if you really wanted to, you could add, I've added red wine to this before. I've added fresh mango puree, I've added strawberry puree, I've added juiced, you can juice wheatgrass and spinach and all this stuff, put that in there, and after about 3 or 4 days, changes the color and it becomes extremely fizzy, but I'll do another video on that. Okay, so I showed you how to do the raw kombucha and just bottle fermenting it, the second stage. What I'm gonna do is I've actually added the 3 different flavors. So this one's a ginger simple syrup, this one's just pressed cherry juice, and this one here is a strawberry simple syrup. Again, you're gonna wanna add, I'd say about 10 to 15% of that. You're gonna want there to be some form of added sugar. The fruits are gonna have its own, and then obviously the simple syrup I made with sugar, water, ginger. I can do a video on simple syrups later, but you're gonna wanna put those into the bottom so that they mix thoroughly, and then you're just going to want to add the the raw kombucha into that. Again, leave yourself a little bit of space because there are going to be some gases that are going to form. But you're going to want to, once this is all done, you're going to want to add or put the lid on top of those. Make sure that it's pretty tight. Ooh, perfect pours. Ayo. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put the lid on top of that. Make sure it's sealed very tight. You're going to notice that the seal at the top is going to be a little bit squishy for the first day, but after 2, 3, 4 days, the lid's going to get very hard, and you're not going to want to open that up until you're going to want to drink it. You're going to be able to keep it in the bottle for a very long time at room temperature in your basement or anywhere. Just don't ferment it in the fridge because it's going to slow down the fermentation process to either really slow or it's not going to ferment at all. But again, just cover it with a lid, keep it tight, put it somewhere room temperature, dark, not exposed to too much sun, and enjoy it 4 days later to weeks and months later. So hopefully you guys like that, and don't forget to subscribe, join, like, comment, do all those things that you normally do. And if there's something that you want to watch me make, just leave it in the comment below and I'll definitely try to get to it. But again, guys, thanks for watching From the Fridge.